It is my honor and privilege this morning to introduce to you Melodie Roschman. To most of you, she will be known as an English literature major and journalism major and the chief editor of the Student Movement. And she also hails from Canada, Ontario, Canada. And whenever I hear Canada, I say to myself, can anything bad come from Canada? So it's certainly good to have her. I remember the first time I noticed Melodie. It was in one of our freshman classes, Western Heritage classes, and it was like 1 week or 2 weeks into the class. And we were discussing some very significant thing. I forgot who it was. And the first thing that she said, I think what he says is stupid. And I was taken aback and impressed by that audacity and brashness. And over the years, I've come to know Melodie more. We share a common love, I think, for C.S. Lewis and many other things. And to the best of my recollection, she never used the word stupid to describe anyone after that. The one thing that I really appreciate about Melodie and deeply honor is that for me, in many ways, she embodies what I would like to see in the future generation of Adventists. A deep love for Jesus, a proper dose of sanctified sarcasm, a passion for justice, an openness to others and opinions of others, a commitment to the church and a desire to articulate what it means to be an Adventist in the postmodern context. I know that one day when I will retire soon, hopefully, I will think of students as Melodie and say, wow, one day I used to teach them and now they've gone on and done many wonderful things. So Melodie, please bless us with your message this morning. I'm eagerly awaiting what you're going to say. Thank you.
They're everywhere. Our guide gestured dramatically at the city surrounding us, and they're targeting you. So look out for each other and be careful. We were on a 3-week tour through Europe, taking in incredible historical buildings, eating delicious food, and stumblingly attempting to learn at least a little French. It was nearly a paradise, except we were warned for all the pickpockets and thieves. Marseille, they said, was a city where they'd steal your wallet as fast as look at you. Later, in Paris, we kept our bags tight on the metro, in art museums, even at the top of the Eiffel Tower. Pickpockets would hunt you to the end of the earth. Worst of all were the gypsies, holding out their children, asking for directions, begging on the steps of buildings. We were warned that they would prey on your generosity and then rob you blind. We were so paranoid about the gypsies that they became a running joke. I can't find my sunglasses, Jillian would say. I stole them, Jenna would reply. Surprise, I'm secretly a gypsy. It felt wrong, but we got used to avoiding eye contact, huddling together, walking past outstretched and empty hands. On one day, though, leaving Sacré-Cœur, the Sacred Heart Cathedral in Paris, my friend Matt couldn't take it anymore. I looked up to discover that he was gone. He was behind me still on the steps, stooping, handing a few euros to an old woman in a shawl. Soon he jogged to catch up with me. I couldn't say no, he said simply, and we carried on. I suddenly felt so guilty, so selfish, showed up by his uncontrollable compassion. For the past few weeks, we've been studying the Beatitudes, the lesser paradox, Jesus' blueprint for a kingdom where the last are first and every expectation we have is turned on its head. Now, some of the Beatitudes are pretty tough to understand, but at first glance, today's seems easy. If you've got it handy, you're welcome to read with me. Matthew 5, verse 7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. The word for merciful here is the Greek eliamon, and it occurs only once in the Gospels. It's related, however, to a Greek word for mercy, elios, that Jesus uses several times elsewhere in Matthew. Mercy in this sense refers to an integrated sense of solidarity with the other that combines justice, compassion, and understanding. This word choice is very intentional. Matthew's readers would have immediately connected it to its Hebrew counterpart, hesed. Jesus then is alluding to Micah 6, verse 8, a passage that outlines what hesed dictates. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. These commandments follow Micah's outline of the ceremonial laws required of the Israelites, and they're meant to act as a response, a simplification. Look, he says, this is the law. Act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with God. When Jesus alludes to this verse, he's drawing attention to the fact that mercy is at the very center of his message. It's at the center of the law. To understand what it means to be merciful is to understand the very core of the Christian mission. Too often, we think of justice as being the same as judgment. Justice is a murderer going to the electric chair. It's people getting what they deserve. Our just God is too often simply us engaging in a very long game of revenge. What's that verse? Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. It becomes a holier version of just wait till my big brother gets here, and then you'll be sorry. But the justice of God is so much more than a verdict or a punishment. It's restorative. The Hebrew word here is tzedek, a word that we translate separately into justice and mercy, when truly the word indicates that the two qualities are entirely intertwined. This tzedek, God's justice, is an insatiable longing to lift up the downtrodden, to comfort the distressed, to balance and bring back together, to prove the innocence of the falsely accused. The justice of God is not the justice of the hangman's noose, but rather that of embracing those who have been pushed away and forced to undergo incredible suffering. If the justice of this God makes us feel uncomfortable, maybe it's because it forces us to realize that we're not always the ones who needs God's justice. Sometimes we're the ones creating the need for it. Our world's history is one built on the backs of victims, and far too often Christians have been the ones doing the building. Just look at the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, the choice between forced conversion and brutal murder that so many colonizers offered indigenous peoples they encountered. Christians have claimed God to justify owning slaves, starting wars, exploiting the poor, reveling in greed and materialism, driving LGBTQ youth to suicide through hatred and condemnation, and destroying the earth that we were given to nurture. But I'm being extreme, you might say. Most Christians, after all, are not so overt in their prejudices. Most of us would never start a war or sell a human being in the name of God. And you're right. No, our problem is much more insidious. We're comfortable. Everyone in this room today experiences a certain level of privilege, of inherent advantage in society, whether that's by being straight, white, male, able-bodied, educated, or simply living in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We live in an unfair world where the dominance of one group of people means exclusion, suppression, or suffering of another, whether this is through racism, sexism, homophobia, the list goes on. To be privileged is too often to be blind to other suffering. To demonstrate this, let's do something really simple together. Every 4 seconds, I want you to clap with me. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Every time we clapped represents a person who will die of starvation or malnutrition-related diseases today. Around 21,000 total, more than twice the population of Benton Harbor. Now, we physically cannot understand numbers like that. We hear about terrible things every day, and it is almost impossible to avoid getting compassion fatigue, becoming numb to all of the suffering. It's so much easier to just turn our backs and accept the world the way things are. But that is simply not acceptable, not for people who profess to belong to a kingdom in which all are equally loved and equally in need of salvation. We may not be the ones actively creating inequalities, but if we are comfortable, if we are okay with others suffering because things aren't so bad for us, then we are condoning inequalities with our silence. The Pharisees were the exact sort of comfortable religious people that Jesus had the strongest words for. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, he rages in Matthew 23, verse 23. For you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and good faith. It is these you ought to have practiced without neglecting the others. The Pharisees were very good at religion. They were very good at not breaking the Sabbath, at eating and wearing and saying the right things. But they did not care about justice, and that made everything else they did dirty rags. If we want to escape the trap of the Pharisees, then, if we want to do justly, what does that mean? It means changing the way that we think and talk about people. It means breaking down the distinction between us and them. There aren't my problems and your problems, my struggles and yours. There are simply forces of oppression that we must combat. To do justly is to use your strength to aid others in their weakness, to refuse to be comfortable. Justice is fighting for the outsider and the loser and the victim. Doing justly is emulating Jesus, the radical who healed the crippled, welcomed the Gentiles, ate with tax collectors and prostitutes, and rescued women from punishment, enabling them to learn and follow him. It is in following this command to do justly, in serving the poor and disenfranchised, healing the mentally and physically sick, and sympathizing with the victim even when it is thankless or irrational, that we embody what philosopher John D. Caputo calls the true church. Not the big, visible one on top with bishops, buildings, power, and photocopying machines, all the hierarchical and theological nonsense, but another one underneath, down in the underbelly of the kingdom of God, in the streets. This is a church, a body whose members resist oppression and silencing in every way, both intellectual and physical. Whether that means sheltering refugees who cross our borders, providing safe spaces for trans and genderqueer individuals, respectfully preserving the history and dignity of indigenous and colonized cultures, or fighting to end sex trafficking worldwide. The church that affirms the love of Christ is not so concerned with drum kits, tattoos, conference presidencies, and committees as it is with an unquenchable passion for justice. In this context, Caputo articulates it so perfectly. My God, he says, is not a name that provides for a good night's sleep, but a passion that disturbs our rest and keeps us on the alert. I do not care about religion, Yahweh seemed to say, but about a religion without religion, or before religion. A religion where the only thing people believe in religiously is justice, where their passion is to let justice flow. Now, you would think that a country where 77% of people report that they are Christians, you would find the greatest expression of this passion, an entire nation devoted to ending injustice. After all, the Declaration of Independence asserts that all are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights. But that is not the case. This year, an estimated 70,000 South American and Central American children, many of them unaccompanied with nothing more than the clothes that they were wearing, crossed into the United States. They were fleeing from violence. They were fleeing from becoming trapped and destroyed by drug wars, used as pawns in cartels. They were refugees. They were treated like invaders. This is not compassion, tweeted Arizona State Representative Adam Quasman. This is the abrogation of the rule of law. In an earlier radio show, he clearly outlined his expectations for dealing with illegal immigrants. We now have to hold these people accountable, he said on the John Justice radio show. We have to start openly talking about arresting people, holding, charging them with crimes when they are not following the law. But let's leave immigration policy out of this for a moment. Let's just talk about Americans. We live in the richest country on earth, after all, the land of opportunity, where with enough hard work and determination, anyone can make a life for her or himself. I want to show you a couple of pictures. Okay, this first graph is a representation of what 92% of Americans choose as the ideal wealth distribution. You can see on the far left, the poorest, and on the right, the richest. So this is what 92% of Americans think is ideal. Next slide. This is what Americans think the distribution of wealth in the United States is. Next slide, please. This is what it actually is, except you'll notice you can't actually see the last 1% on the right, so if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, they have their own section. That's the 1%. Now, this seems obscene to me, an impossible imbalance that traps those on the lower end from ever escaping. But I'm not here to say whether politically, and economically, the system is justifiable. I'm Canadian. I don't get to vote in your elections. Whether the immigration, economic, and social policies of this country are smart and effective is up for you to decide. No. What I have a problem with is looking at this reality and then calling this country Christian. Allegiant to Christ, who non-violently turns the other cheek and blesses his enemies, who heals the sick and feeds the hungry without asking if they have insurance, who bids the little children to come unto him no matter what color their skin is. Comedian Stephen Colbert put it bluntly: if this is going to be a Christian nation that doesn't help the poor, either we have to pretend that Jesus was just as selfish as we are, or we've got to acknowledge that he commanded us to love the poor and serve the needy without condition, and then admit that we just don't want to do it. See, that's the catch. Without condition. We love conditions. Pages of terms and conditions we will never read, contracts, rules, situations. If someone fits the criteria for citizenship, we'll give them a visa. If someone works as hard as possible and still can't make ends meet, then they deserve welfare. If someone looks or acts or believes enough like us, then we'll accept them and give them rights. But by definition, the love of Jesus is unconditional. Love, he commands. Love your enemies. Do good to those who persecute you. Visit the sick and in prison. Provide for the hungry and thirsty. Clothe the naked and welcome the stranger to your home. And do so without any expectation that they deserve it, that they will repay you, or that they will even thank you. It doesn't make any sense. It goes against every bit of temperance and logic and practicality that we have ever been taught. Unconditional love is insane. But that's the insanity of the unconditional love and mercy of God. It's madness. The modus operandi of a God who is irrevocably, madly in love with the world and every one of its inhabitants, and nothing that we can ever do will either earn his love or drive him away. To follow Jesus, then, is to emulate his love in our love for others as he has compelled us to do. It is to fall madly in love with the world, regardless of the response. Tony Campolo, a renowned author and evangelist, tells the story of visiting Haiti when his son Bart was a little boy. We were walking down the main street of Port-au-Prince, he writes, when a ragged and dirty child confronted us, pathetically holding out his cupped hands to beg some pennies from us. Bart, I said, don't give him anything. If you give him so much as a nickel, every poor kid in Port-au-Prince will be on us in no time, and they won't let us alone until they've got every cent we have. So, was my son's answer, unforgettable and piercing to my heart. A couple of paragraphs later, Campolo drives the point home. Giving, he says, is our responsibility. What the recipients do with what we give is theirs. God puts the wealth in our hands, he concludes, without any guarantee from us that we will use what he gives us in a way that pleases him. He trusts us. Ought we not to do to others what he has done for us? On that great day when I stand before him, he will ask if I gave to the needy. I do not think he will wash if I say, I thought about it, but they did not look trustworthy. The Lord might just answer such an excuse by saying, you should have done what I asked you to do. In turn, I would have held them responsible for what they did with the money. That is what we are told to do. Give, reach out, embrace, regardless of the pressures of society around us, regardless of the response. Be merciful and love. It's a powerful, difficult, nearly impossible command in itself. But there's still one more direction left we need to understand, and that is to walk humbly with God. Humbly. To be merciful is not simply expressed in our passion for justice, in our unconditional love, but also in our humility, in the face of a God who is far greater and more complex than we will ever comprehend. To walk humbly is to accept that we may not have all of the answers yet, that we might even be wrong. It is to be gentle with others and ourselves as we slip up and fail again and again in our attempts to reflect Christ. It is to believe the best of others' decisions, to accept that sometimes in their journeys of faith and their relationships with God, others may come to different conclusions than we do, and that is okay. Blessed are the merciful, Jesus promises, for they will receive mercy. This is not simply a promise or an equation. Rather, it is the key to understanding the paradox. All of us are called to restore justice because all of us have caused injustice. All of us will need to receive mercy because all of us have been victimized, been made to suffer beyond reason, by evil, by destruction, by our fellow human beings. In the kingdom of God, there are no divisions, no lines in the sand, no distinctions. There are merely the followers of Christ, the merciful. They are the ones who will receive mercy, those who treat each other with gentleness and humility, give love unconditionally, and burn with an unquenchable passion for justice. May God have mercy on us all.